any other page or any other source, you're going to get really confused in sensors and optics. I even looked at the library, took some books, and it's quite confusing to be honest. This presentation's purpose is to make things as simple as possible for our project. Not only is it going to make everything simple, but it will also help us assign the tasks properly and distribute them between us evenly. This way, everything's going to be much more organized instead of this chaotic mess that we don't know anything about. Regardless, with that said, let's start. So what we're going to do is we're going to just ask 3 questions, and that should be the end of our presentation. It's going to be very simple. First of all, we're going to ask why, how, and what. With the why, we're going to ask why use sensors. First of all, it has 3 main functions. 1, autonomy, 2, detection, 3, accuracy. By autonomy, this is already a very in-depth topic. In terms of the autonomy, we also understand that there are levels to autonomy. This is the first thing that we have to understand. Within any vehicle, anything that goes unmanually and just by itself requires a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning. This is something we have to understand. Saying that it should go back to base by itself is already a complex thing by in and of itself. And the level of artificial intelligence required is very important for this. And this will require sensors, whether we like it or not. So this is the first thing we have to take into account. As we see in the presentation, we have 5 levels of autonomy, usually specified by most companies. And I'm not going to go into this in detail, you can look at this in yourself. But level 5 is basically where it goes and does everything by itself. And level 0 where it just gives you a warning, which is the level of autonomy that most cars have. Oh, we need more gas. Oh, the brakes aren't working properly, or so on and so forth. The levels of autonomy are detailed below, and you can easily see them whenever you feel like it. Regardless, let's go to the second point that we have to discuss. Detection. Yes?
What level of autonomy are we going for?
This is something I'm trying to ask about later, but we need to have to specify in detail later on. Because we can't really specify the sensors until we have the level of autonomy actually requested to be specified and defined. So this is very important actually.
Abdul-Rahman, these levels are good for, I think, car, right?
Yeah, of course, they're very important. So much for us. We need to know what level of autonomy is for us.
Okay, how can you specify the levels for the UAV? Because it's not going to be same, I think, with the car. There is no traffic jam in the air, there is no obstacle.
This isn't just for cars, by the way. This is for self-driving in general.
Okay, but we are continuing by using these levels, right?
Yep.
Now, so we are not making the car.
Yeah, this autonomy, yeah, I understand what you mean. These levels of autonomy aren't made for cars specifically. These are in general, both cars and drones, or anything in general. Anything that can improve autonomy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Continue, I think.
Second thing we need to have is detection. Detection of fire requires a lot of depends on what we have. This is something we're going to detail. For example, are we going to detect it using images? This is one option. Are we going to use it using, for example, cameras, basically? Or are we going to use something so that we can detect the photochemical particles involved in it, which would involve LiDAR sensors? This is something we're going to go into later on. For example, RGB. All right? RGB sensors are one example. Or are we going to use a different approach? Use radar sensors, which is supposed to detect motion. Now, all this is what we're going to discuss further on. Which one is good, which one is bad, and how we're going to orient things. And why not? We might use one or the other. Lastly, let's look at the third one. Accuracy. Accuracy is not our important stuff for this subtask, because the accuracy required is for the detection, not only just for the detection is already done. Accuracy is for the drop load, the carry load of the extinguishing of the fire. So to actually properly place it so that it doesn't go like 20 meters far away and actually right where we need it, this is also going to require 2 sensors. For the same specified ones that we specified, but we need it from a certain proximity that we need to specify. We need to know the accuracy required. Proximity is what we are actually looking for. And materials involved. Materials, of course, this isn't something we're going to focus on now. This is something negligible for today. Materials for the extinguishing fires. Sorry for the very bad handwriting. Anyways, let's go on. How to check fires. So we have this. These are the basic three types of sensors that we're going to deal with, as I specified right now. We have LiDAR, cameras, and radar sensors. In summary, LiDAR sensors are used simply to detect particles or anything of that sort. Using, I don't know, we can use colors, we can use other types of vision, we can use many other ways. How it's oriented is already a very deep topic in and of itself, and there are courses taught on this subject. This is something we're not going to get into, but we're going to talk more in detail later. Second thing, we have cameras. Cameras, we have visible light spectrum, you have the infrared, we have, when we're dealing with infrared, we probably need to deal with thermal sensors. And they're going to be the easiest ones that we can use. Of course, we're going to talk about this a bit more after you finish the slides, and what recommendations we need, and what we really prefer, and what we don't want to get close to, and so on and so forth. Radar sensors, the ones that detect motion. Although it has been argued against for many times, I'm still thinking about it. And I'm sure many of you would actually argue against me on this, and I absolutely see why your point is as such. But this is something we're going to leave for last, because this is more into the accuracy part for the drama code. So let's just ignore radar sensors completely for now. And if we're going to use LiDAR sensors, we might as well take the primary pollutants into account. You can just look at them later on. No need to memorize them or anything. Anyway, so what is it that we're expecting of us for these 2 weeks? Perhaps this week, what I want is for us to optimize our fire detection model. Alright? Second week, we'll try to find sensor constraints, with the constraints as follows. Constraints are the price, range, accuracy, weight, and simplicity, ease of use. Let's go back to what we were doing. So in terms of optimization of the fire detection model, how are we supposed to optimize it? As we said, the different sensors have different pros and cons. Nothing is perfect. For example, if we were to use the ideal sensor, the one and only that we really need, thermal sensors, it would make our jobs heavily easy. But the problem is with this, the budget. Either budget or range. If it's going to be cheap, it's probably going to be very short range, and we need it to be a bit more than 50 meters of range. It has to be more than 50 meters because we might go a bit up, a bit down, and this is very important. When it's cheap, it's usually not going to detect at this range. And if it's going to detect that range, then the budget is going to be probably very high. The cheapest one I found was roughly $600. And that's no way we can buy that.
Also, it's going to be very heavy.
Actually, there were very cheap ones. I think I found one for like only 50 grams or 60 grams. That's the one, but the problem is the budget, as I said. So this is very important.
It also depends on the range. What will be the range of the flight?
Yeah, as I said, I specified it's going to be at 50 meters of altitude. So this is going to be a very big problem later on. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. So this is the one ideal one that we really need. But if we can't find it, then we're going to have to utilize other sensors and replace it with this only one, basically. Because this is going to be the best one for detecting fires. Alright? Any AI we use is going to be very simple with this. Instantaneous. Nothing hard, nothing difficult. We don't really need any Coursera courses, any courses, nothing, none of that. This is very easy. You can learn this in like 1 week to complete it. The whole autonomy, simple and done. If we can find it. If someone could. This is why we really need this, and we need to put a whole week of dedication on this by itself. Anyways, so let's look at the other sensors that we're talking about. Again, we're talking about camera sensors, nothing else right now, just the camera ones. So let's look at perhaps a combination of UV and infrared. Infrared sensors, for example, thermal sensors, usually tend to be very short range or have a high budget. UV sensors, on the other hand, go in a very long range on the visible spectrum. But the problem is they're very inaccurate. And how inaccurate can we have our measurements is something we can look into. How accurate do our measurements to be, don't worry, you don't need to memorize any of this. Luckily, we have it recorded from our friend, so we can just, refresh your memory basically now. Let's look at the visible light spectrum. A friend of mine, thank you, has actually pointed out that visible light spectrum is very difficult to deal with. And I have not actually thought about this before. I thought, well, it's just another option. The thing with this, within the visible light spectrum, there's so many distractions. For example, we're dealing with trees, cars, birds, anything that can be in the way. And it's much more difficult to deal with these obstacles when we're doing artificial intelligence or machine learning. But you can ask, Abdul-Rahman, we're just doing fires. It's nothing complex. All we need is the fire. Thing is, fires are not easy to detect at all. You have smoke, you have other things in range, you have other things that preserve as obstacles. These are things that you have to take into account. Not only that, the algorithms are very difficult to deal with. In terms of power usage, that was an argument we had at the last meeting, but all the professors told me power is not your concern with the sensors at all whatsoever. If anything, the power that we should be concerned of is that of the motors and propellers. But even that was apparently decided to be not that much of a big deal because it's actually pretty functional for now. If it becomes a concern, we'll focus on it later. But this is the biggest problem we have. The cameras. As we said, we're not focusing on accuracy for now at all, so let me just erase this real fast. Second of all, let's look at LiDAR sensors. Why would we need to use LiDAR sensors? In case we're not too sure of this. This is our topic of research this week. LiDAR. Anyways, so why would we need to use LiDAR sensors? They're the best ones at detecting any form of chemicals that we have. For example, I described the pollutants available. And let's say we use RGB, right? RGB is basically fire detection systems are best used to detect smoke. If we detect the smoke, then we're probably going to get a good lead on where the fire is. Of course, we can study out where the origination of fire and smoke relation is, but that will be for later on. This is not our concern. For now, we just have to understand that LiDAR is a viable option. Not our preferred one, but a viable option. Our preferred one, as mentioned in the early stage, is thermal. So, the most recommended one and the most utilized one that we can easily work with is RGB. If you go to LiDAR sensors, I prefer the first one was RGBs. Then you might go to other ones, but this is the most utilized one and the best one and easiest one to program with. Sad face. Basically. As for radar sensors. Now this is going to be a very heated debate later on, because I'm sure that no one wants to deal with radar sensors. They're not only difficult to deal with, but they're also somewhat expensive and so on and so forth. Alright, they have a lot of cons. I will admit that. But there's one very good component. Detection of motion. Now, of course, this is like our last resort that we'll ever go to. Like 1 in 1,000 chance. But if we ever result to radar, then it's because we need to detect the smoke and the fire movements, and perhaps even for the accuracy of the drop load, which might be important later on. But for now, it's negligible. Just a brief idea for later on. And let's talk about the constraints. As I said, in summary, camera will be thermal, radar, motion, LiDAR, smoke. Anyways, constraints. We have 5 constraints, and I'm going to detail them much better right now on the board. In terms of the range, we need it anywhere from roughly 70 to 30 meters ideal, so they can detect whether you go up or down. But the standard is 15 meters. This is what we need. The only error I made here was just an assumption. Baba can actually correct me on this later on, but this is just an assumption I made on the spot. All right. Regardless, let's look at the accuracy. Accuracy, we can actually run away with none that. We don't need it to be that detailed. Infection fires, especially forest fires, doesn't need that much detail. So accuracy is actually one of the least important variables for now. It may be a concern once we're adding on the drop load, but not for now as far as I'm concerned. As for the price range, this needs to be consulted with the public. As far as I'm concerned with the price range, I would say ideally we need something anywhere from, of course for free, that would be ideal, but anywhere max I would say $10. We don't want to go above that. That's already too much actually. 10 USD is already too much. That's expensive.